There's an XCOM game that came out 4 years after XCOM 2. There's a good chance you missed it, or at least misunderstood it. Hi, I'm Calvin, and today we're going to take a look at XCOM Chimera Squad. We're going to talk about what it is and what it isn't, as well as touch on why I think some of the criticisms about it are a bit harsh. So, first things first, Chimera Squad is a turn-based tactics game set in the XCOM universe. It takes place 5 years after the events of the previous game, in which XCOM defeated the alien occupation and freed the planet. Just like XCOM 2, it was created by Firaxis and shared many of the same developers and designers. The engine it uses is very obviously a derivative of the XCOM 2 game engine, and if you've played that game, you'll immediately be very comfortable with most of the user interface and graphics. Chimera Squad wasn't intended to be an expansion or a sequel to XCOM 2, but instead a smaller story within the same universe and a way to experiment with a different way of doing things. To understand your role in the game, we need to spend an extra minute expanding on the lore. The invasion and occupation forces were made up of a mix of aliens and human-alien hybrids. However, these were not willing participants, but instead enslaved soldiers controlled by a mixture of psychic powers, implanted chips, and good old-fashioned brainwashing. Once the Elders were destroyed and Advent dismantled, these beings were able to cast off their chains and act as individuals. This resulted in a planet with a mixed human, hybrid and alien population. The non-humans couldn't just go home. For some, their true home was unknown, and for others who were spawned, birthed or engineered after the initial invasion, Earth was their home. 5 years after the downfall of Advent, some semblance of legitimate government has been re-established, and all of Earth's mismatch of inhabitants are making a go at cohabitation. It's not an easy piece, and there are plenty of organisations taking advantage of the chaotic state of the planet to gain power and riches for themselves, or push their own agendas. To make matters worse, Earth is littered with powerful alien technology left over from the war and the occupation. Weapons, explosives, implants, psychic control devices, all of which could be devastating if they fell into the wrong hands. This is where you come in. It's not exactly specified what XCOM's role is in this new liberated society, but one department that is depicted is simply known as Reclamation. Their purpose is to locate and secure powerful alien technology. Sometimes this requires force, and within Reclamation is a paramilitary force that kicks in doors and confiscates this technology from criminals, gangs and terrorists. Chimera Squad is one such unit within Reclamation. Your squad has been sent to City 31, a place undergoing a great deal of unrest caused by several underworld organisations that control a lot of alien technology. Your job is to investigate these groups, reclaim the alien tech and neutralise the threat they pose. You're not the police, your job is not to protect and serve, and you have full authorisation to use deadly force. However, you do work alongside the local police force and do receive additional rewards when you're able to subdue targets instead of just vaporising them. Gameplay is split between two areas: your local headquarters where you manage your squad and select missions, as well as the individual mission locations that are resolved using the turn-based tactical interface. The missions are short, action-packed and to the point, so rather than describe all of the features, I think the best thing I can do is talk you through a few minutes of gameplay. First, let's check the status of our squad. We've currently got the maximum of 8 agents. These are all individual characters and have their own voices, abilities and backstories. This is Blueblood, who functions as our marksman. We can view his backstory, choose new abilities as he levels up and modify his equipment. We can also change the colour of his armour, but who cares? As well as our squad, we've got a couple of mechs who serve as our backup if our agents are downed in the field. We've got a supply store for stocking up on essentials, a spec ops menu where we can assign a free agent to do background tasks, and a training module in which we can use to unlock new abilities for one of our team or heal any negative conditions that they may have picked up as a result of battle damage. We've also got our assembly room for building new armour, weapons and upgrades that serves as a cut down version of the research lab found in other XCOM games. There is nothing groundbreaking here. You pick something you want, you pay the cost and wait a few turns and it's complete. Finally, we have the situation map that shows the 9 districts that make up City 31. Our goal is to keep the anarchy meter from filling up, and we do this by carefully managing each district. If the 5 pips on an individual district fill up, future increases roll over to the main anarchy bar. I didn't find this much of a challenge on regular difficulty as you've got loads of tools at your disposal to help manage the city anarchy level. You can purchase field teams for any of the 9 districts, each of which earns you resources and reduces the anarchy in its corresponding district. You also have 4 different field team abilities that unlock as you build and upgrade your field teams. These let you reduce or freeze the anarchy levels of a particular district, or occasionally reduce the total city anarchy, but they do have a cooldown, so they must be used strategically. Each turn of the metagame moves the calendar forward by 1 day. You don't have to run a mission each day, but there isn't normally much of a reason not to. We've got 1 mission available today, and its colour denotes it's a story mission. Sometimes you'll have 3 or 4 missions available, so you can pick the one that you feel is best depending on the particular rewards. Occasionally you'll get a pure investigative mission which is automatically resolved and proceeds to the next turn, but today we've got to investigate an organisation known as Grey Phoenix. We can see from the UI that as well as moving the story forward, completing the mission will reduce the anarchy in this district and give us 70 credits to spend on new equipment. We now get to fine tune our team before we pack them into the APC and send them off towards danger, and we get an overview of the individuals we've chosen and can modify their equipment accordingly. Note that the robots on the left and the right are just for backup purposes. If everything goes to plan, we won't need them, but if an agent is damaged during a multi-part mission, we can bring in one of our backup bots to replace them. The bots aren't amazing, but they are far better than being a man down. So we click launch and our APC rolls out and bumps off down the road on its merry way. We then get a bit more info from Whisper, our intel guy, and then get to decide exactly how we want to make entry into this particular facility or location. Most missions are made up of between 1 and 3 encounters, and each encounter starts with a breach action. There are normally several possible points of entry, each with its own upsides and downsides, and sometimes more are made available if your agents have got the right equipment. As a simple example, you might be able to blow through a wall if one of your agents brought along a breaching charge. The first encounter here has several possible breaching points that support a single agent each, and are numbered 1 to 6. The order we enter determines the order of our agents, and we can change the order of each location to match the order we want things to end up in. I'm setting this up so the agent with the worst marksmanship but a powerful shotgun gets the aim bonus, and then my second and third agents get to go immediately after the first. I then initiate entry and each of my agents gets a breach action. Depending on the situation, enemies are either aggressive, alert or surprised. Aggressive enemies will get a free shot at my team after they have finished their breach actions, so my aim is to kill or otherwise disable those first. Alert enemies get to reposition or take a defensive action but can't attack, and surprised enemies have to just sit there and wait for their first turn. I can't move during the breach action, so it's mostly a case of picking a target and shooting at it as I enter the location. Some agents do have some additional options, for instance Cherub, the guy with the shield, can instead power that up to absorb some of the incoming fire, which is sometimes more valuable than taking a shot with his pistol. Once the breach action is finished, we start the encounter in earnest and a turn order is generated in which you can see on the right. Generally turns are interleave, which means each individual takes a turn one after the other. If there's a mismatch between the number of agents and opponents, then things are divided up equally. As an example, if I have 4 agents and there are 8 enemies, the turn order will be 1 of mine, 2 of theirs, 1 of mine, 2 of theirs, etc, etc. If this sounds terrifying to you, then you're probably an XCOM veteran who's used to a game where a single unhindered enemy can wreck your entire day by crippling or killing a vital team member. However, Chimera Squad is not a punishing game. Your agents are quite tough, and are only injured when downed rather than killed outright. There is a little number next to each combatant showing their turn order, so things normally work out quite well if you try to kill or otherwise hamper the enemies who get to take a turn before your next agent. You do also get access to a few single-use abilities that let you modify the turn order somewhat, so if something particularly problematic is developing, you can use these to get yourself out of a bind. Aside from this, the missions themselves follow the format well defined by XCOM 1 and 2. You've got 2 action points, shooting generally ends your turn, and as your team members level up they get access to plenty of new abilities that let you bend those rules to breaking point. Many of the special abilities don't actually cost an action in Chimera Squad, but are instead limited to a single use per mission or encounter, so it's normally a case of picking the best time to use that single charge rather than using it as your primary action whenever it's available. Once you've completed an encounter, you move on to the next, starting with a new breach action. The next encounter in this particular mission has got 2 entry points, a main door that can support the whole team, and a side entry that can support a single agent. I use the repel point for my big hulking melee alien as the extra mobility it grants on the first turn will probably be pretty useful, and I send the rest of my agents through the main door. I'll also use a target analyzer on this entry, a single-use bonus item that gives everyone at this breach point some extra crit chance. Just like with the previous entry, my team will take their shots. However, this time I've killed all the aggressive enemies, so I don't take any return fire. In the first turn, the Muton on my team takes a couple of shots, but this activates his Berserker Rage and he gets a free automatic action and beats one of the enemies to death with his ham fists. After completing this segment, we get one final breach action as we enter the last encounter of the mission. Our agents take some hits but get the job done, and are packed back into the APC and taken back to our HQ. If an agent took a lot of damage or was down during combat, there is a chance that they will take a semi-permanent injury which hampers their combat ability. The negative effect from a semi-permanent injury can be quite powerful, but the injury can be healed by assigning the agent to the recovery program in the training centre for a couple of days. If one of our agents was downed and we didn't manage to stabilise them within 3 turns, we would fail the mission and have to restart it. There isn't really any permadeath in Chimera Squad. The game doesn't punish you in the same sort of way that XCOM 1 or 2 does. Some of the missions are very difficult, but the campaign itself is a story rather than a continuing struggle, and it feels very different from the main games of the franchise because of this. Now, the game had a bit of a mixed reaction from fans, and I think most of it can be put down to a misunderstanding about what exactly Chimera Squad was supposed to be. I don't think this is really the fault of the developer. They were quite clear about their intentions for the game. It was never designed as a successor to XCOM 2 or a new main game in the series, but rather a companion piece that told a smaller story in the same universe. Their marketing reflected this, as did the price. Even at launch, the game retailed for somewhere between $10 and $20 depending on when you bought it and if you got it part of a bundle or not. If you look through the negative reviews, you'll notice a few common threads that seem to run through the majority of them. The first of these seems to reflect this misunderstanding of the product, the main complaint being that this game just either isn't as good as XCOM 2 or it isn't XCOM 3. I found these reviews quite frustrating to read, as just because a game isn't as good as a different game, it doesn't mean that it's not worth playing. Personally, I think XCOM 2 with the War of the Chosen DLC is probably the best tactical turn-based game out there. However, I don't want to play the same game every day of my life, and I'm glad alternatives like Jagged Alliance 3, the Lamplighters League and Classified 44 exist, because otherwise I'd become very bored. The second group of reviews seem to highlight reasonable issues. A lot of them complain about game-breaking bugs. I didn't run into any of those myself during my recent playthrough, so I'm assuming they mostly got fixed sometime after release. They also complain about the poor writing when it comes to a lot of the dialogue between your agents. I think this is valid. There isn't much to say about it apart from it's very formulaic and just not very good. Others are unsatisfied with the depth of the game and the duration of the campaign, which is about 20 hours long depending on how you perform. These are all valid comments that I can't really argue with. However, I think the low price of the game does mitigate these complaints somewhat, and it wouldn't stop me from recommending it to others. The third group of negative reviews are my favourite. These consist of people who have 50 to 100 hours of time in the game, enough to play the campaign through to completion between 2 and 5 times, yet still wouldn't recommend it to anyone else. I guess people are complicated. Questionable reviews aside, I think Chimera Squad is a half decent game that would fit nicely in the collection of any fan of the genre. It's smaller in scope than most of the other games of its type, but I found the unusual mechanics such as the breach system and interleave turns very interesting and a nice change of pace from what I'm used to. I also found that a slightly smaller story that didn't involve me having to save the entire world was a breath of fresh air. I think my strongest complaint is that the game didn't really take advantage of using pre-written unique characters over a class system. It's obvious they tried to go for a ragtag team feeling by creating a selection of quirky characters that are supposed to play off each other, but it's just poorly executed and falls flat. Worse than that, none of it has any effect on the game world. I think it would have been far better if their relationships were worked into the gameplay itself, perhaps altering or augmenting the skills of others based on how the characters are represented. For instance, Terminal has an ability that lets her grant another agent an instant action out of normal turn order. This is very useful, but it's not very inventive. It would be better perhaps if it was instead tailored to each other agent. She could antagonise the Muton, granting him a rage attack, or send her gremlin over to Cherub to power up his shield. If accompanied by some suitable related banter, it could flesh out these characters a bit more, allow us to pick favourites and feel a connection to and between them. Aside from that missed opportunity, I do agree the game is a bit short and lacks a lot of the depth and variation found in other turn-based tactical games. However, I'm keenly aware that the release price was supposed to reflect the quantity of the content, and as such I don't judge the game too harshly for it. It only cost me a tenner, and I think that was well worth it, and I'm glad I gave it a go. So in summary, if you like turn-based tactical games and want to try something a little different, pop Chimera Squad on your wishlist and pick it up next time it's on sale. It's not without its problems, but it's inventive, refreshing and cheap as chips. Hi there! If you've played Chimera Squad before or because of this review, let me know how you got on with it in a comment, as I'll be really interested to know your thoughts. As usual, if you enjoyed this then please click the like button and subscribe to my channel if you want more of this sort of thing in the future, and I hope to see you back soon.